Welcome to Cozy Fantasy Studio, where gentle magic and sleep stories begin. Tonight, we journey through the world's most beloved fairy tales. Tales of snow and song, gardens and golden hearts. So find a soft place to rest. Let your breath slow and your thoughts wander. The night is long, the air is calm, and the fairy tales are waiting. The city slept under a hush of winter. Snow fell in slow, thoughtful flakes, settling on rooftops and window panes like feathers that had forgotten flight. Lamps glowed softly behind curtains, and every chimney sighed a thin breath of warmth into the still night. The air was crisp, clean, and filled with the quiet sound of winter thinking. Inside one small house, where ivy clung to the frost like a memory of summer, lived two children who were not brother and sister, but loved each other as if they were. Their names were Gerda and Kai. They had grown up in neighboring attics, their windows so close that they could lean out and almost touch hands across the narrow gutter. Between their windows, their grandmothers had built two little flower boxes, one for each child. In summer, these boxes overflowed with green leaves and bright blossoms, tulips, daisies, and tiny roses that reached toward one another until they tangled in a soft bridge of petals. The children called it their garden in the sky, and they would often climb out and sit among the blooms, sharing stories and little cakes, whispering secrets that only the wind could hear. When evening fell, they would press their palms against the frosted glass and trace hearts in the thin mist of their breath, and when the first snow came, they would scrape it gently into small figures, snow angels, snowbirds, and once even a snow queen, which made them both laugh until their sides ached. Gerda was gentle and bright, with hair the color of wheat and eyes as clear as spring water. Kai was curious and clever, always wanting to know how everything worked, the way frost made patterns on glass, or how the moonlight could make snow shimmer like silver. They were different, but together they were whole, sunlight and thought, warmth and wonder. One evening, when the fire crackled low and the lamps flickered, Kai's grandmother told them a story. Her voice was soft, like wool pulled thin. Far above, she said, beyond the clouds and the stars, lives the Snow Queen in her palace of ice. Her halls are endless mirrors, her floor a frozen lake so clear you can see the sky beneath it. She rides through the world when storms rage, wrapped in her white cloak, her breath colder than the moonlight. Gerda shivered, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. But she cannot come in here, can she? The grandmother smiled. Not if you keep your heart warm, little one. Kai laughed, brushing frost from the window. If she came here, I'd put her on the stove and melt her. They all laughed then, but outside, the snow drifted higher, and the wind sang through the chimneys with a voice that was not quite a song, and not quite a sigh. Winter deepened, the sky grew pale and distant. One day, Kai's grandmother was talking again about the Snow Queen's mirror, the one said to have been made by a mischievous spirit who delighted in mischief. It was a mirror that twisted all good things into bad, she said. A flower looked withered, a kind face appeared cruel. The spirit flew through the world with it, laughing, until the mirror slipped from his hands and shattered into a million pieces. Gerda listened wide-eyed. Kai smiled faintly. They say, continued the grandmother, that the tiny shards of that mirror still drift through the air. Some fall into people's eyes, making them see only the ugly side of things. Others pierce the heart, and then that heart grows cold as ice. Kai shrugged, pretending to be brave. It's only a story, he said, pressing his nose to the window. But the sky outside had turned a strange, glittering grey, and the snow swirled in patterns too fine to follow. That evening, as twilight fell like smoke, a sharp glimmer passed through the air. It flashed once like a spark of glass, invisible to most eyes, but not to Kai's. He cried out and clutched his chest. Then his face twisted in pain. Something flew into my eye, he said, rubbing it hard, and another, another in my heart. But it's nothing. It's gone." Gerda reached for him, but Kai only turned away. He blinked fast, and when he looked again, the room seemed different. The fire no longer looked warm, only smoky. The flowers on the windowsill seemed silly. Even Gerda's soft smile looked foolish to him now. The shard of the broken mirror had done its work. That winter, Kai changed. He no longer laughed at Gerda's songs or played among the flower boxes. He teased the children in the street, mocking their mittens and snowmen. When Gerda tried to show him the little rose she had kept alive through the frost, he only said, "It's ugly, just like all the others." Gerda cried softly that night, but Kai only stared at the frost on the window, tracing the edges of the icy shapes. The frost patterns looked like maps, roads and rivers, towers and palaces. He whispered, "They're beautiful, more beautiful than flowers. They are perfect." And somewhere far away, in her northern palace, the Snow Queen felt the faint tremor of a soul turning toward her realm. The days grew shorter, the snow fell harder, and one evening, when the moon was silver and the streets were still, a sleigh appeared in the square. It was drawn by white horses and glided without a sound. Its driver was wrapped in fur and frost, her eyes bright as ice stars. Kai leaned over the fence to watch. The sleigh slowed beside him. "Would you like a ride?" said the woman, in a voice that was like falling snow, soft and cold. Kai nodded. The gate opened by itself, and he stepped into the sleigh. The woman smiled and leaned close. "Wrap yourself well," she said, placing a kiss on his forehead. The touch was colder than the wind, but it did not hurt. It only made him forget the chill. The sleigh rose and drifted through the snow. The town below disappeared. The stars blurred into mist, and Kai's heart, already half ice, beat slower and slower until he no longer remembered his home, his flowers, or Gerda calling his name in the wind. Far below, Gerda pressed her face to the window, searching the swirling white. "Kai," she whispered, but there was only the sound of snow, falling like sleep itself. The days that followed were hushed and white. Snow gathered in corners, drifted against doors, and rested on rooftops like a blanket too heavy to lift. The river was frozen solid. The streets were empty except for the whisper of wind. It was as if the city had fallen under a spell of quiet mourning. Gerda still came each morning to the attic window, brushing frost from the glass, hoping to see Kai lean out from his side with his usual grin. But the other window stayed dark. His grandmother had wept until her tears turned to ice upon her cheeks. The sleigh had vanished that night into the swirling snow, and no one had seen Kai since. Still, Gerda waited. She placed her little red boots by the sill, hoping he would see them and remember their summer games. She tended the wilted rose in her box, whispering to it as if it could send her message through the roots of the world. "Tell him to come home," she would say. "Tell him I miss him." Winter stretched on. The wind carried stories that a boy had been seen in the north, gliding over ice, laughing in the company of a tall white woman whose hair was spun from frost. Gerda listened to every tale, but few dared believe them. The Snow Queen was, after all, only a story, or so they thought. But one evening, as Gerda watched the pale blue sky darken, she felt a pull in her chest, as if her heart had heard a distant call. She rose, wrapped herself in her grandmother's shawl, and said softly, "If Kai is lost, then I will find him." She left her house before dawn, when the snowflakes still drifted like feathers from an unseen wing. Her footsteps left tiny prints that glimmered in the starlight. The city was asleep, but the river murmured beneath its frozen skin. She walked beside it until she reached the bridge, where she and Kai had once thrown rose petals into the water. Now the petals were gone, but the memory lingered, faint as perfume. "Show me the way," she whispered to the river. pressing her mittened hand against the ice. For a moment she thought she heard an answer, a low hum, a pulse beneath the surface. Then a crack of sound. The ice shifted, groaned, and in that moment she knew which way to go. She followed the river northward, her breath clouding the air. The sky brightened from deep blue to silver grey. The frost on the branches glittered like stars. A little robin hopped ahead of her, then paused to look back, as if guiding her. She smiled faintly. "You know where he is, don't you?" The bird flew ahead, and Gerda followed. As the morning wore on, she grew tired and hungry. At the edge of the forest, she found a small hut where smoke curled from the chimney. She knocked timidly, and an old woman opened the door. Her eyes were bright and kind. "Come in, my dear," said the woman. "You must be cold as a snowdrop." The warmth inside made Gerda's fingers tingle painfully, but soon the heat melted the chill. The old woman gave her a bowl of soup and a seat by the fire. "What brings you here?" she asked. "I'm looking for my friend," Gerda replied. "A boy named Kai. He was taken by the Snow Queen." The woman frowned thoughtfully. "The Snow Queen, you say?" "Ah, yes. She passed through here not long ago, her sleigh bright as moonlight. Perhaps your boy was with her." Gerda's heart leapt. "Do you know where she went?" "To the far north," said the woman, stirring the fire. "Beyond forests and mountains, where the sky dances with colors at night." Gerda nodded firmly. "Then I must go there." The woman smiled gently and brushed a strand of hair from Gerda's face. "Rest first, my child. The journey is long." She guided Gerda to a soft bed of moss and lavender. The scent was soothing, the air warm. As Gerda drifted toward sleep, she heard the woman humming, a slow looping tune that wrapped around her like mist. But there was something strange about that song. Its melody circled endlessly, lulling, heavy with forgetfulness. When Gerda awoke, sunlight streamed through the window, and the snow outside gleamed like silver dust. She sat up quickly. "I must go now," she said. "I have to find Kai." But the old woman shook her head. "What boy? You are safe here, my dear. Stay. The world is cold beyond these woods." Gerda frowned. For a moment her purpose flickered, like a candle in a draught. Was there really a boy, she thought, or was it only a dream? Then, as she looked out the window, she saw a rose bush growing against the wall, full of red blossoms, impossibly alive in the snow. The sight pierced her heart with memory. She touched one petal, and it whispered in her mind, "Kai." The enchantment broke. Gerda turned to the old woman. "You tried to make me forget him." The woman sighed. "I meant only to keep you safe." But Gerda was already pulling on her cloak. "Thank you for the fire," she said softly, "but I must go where the snow leads." Outside, she pressed her hand to the rose bush. The petals trembled, and she felt the warmth of Kai's memory, like a spark in the cold. "Goodbye, kind roses," she whispered. "Tell the others I am coming." As she walked away, the wind carried a flurry of red petals behind her, bright as hearts against the white snow. The forest grew darker, deeper. Ice hung from the branches in long, glittering spears. Her boots sank in the drifts, and her breath came in clouds. Yet she kept walking, her heart steady, her eyes fixed on the northern horizon. High above, unseen, the Snow Queen drove her sleigh across the clouds. Beside her sat a boy with eyes as pale as mirrors. His laughter rang cold and clear. The Queen leaned close and whispered, "See how perfect the snowflakes are, Kai. Each one flawless, each one the same." Kai nodded, smiling faintly, but deep inside, something small and warm still flickered. A memory he could not name, of a girl with a rose in her hand and sunlight in her eyes. And far below, Gerda followed the whisper of that memory through the endless snow. The world grew whiter the farther Gerda walked. The snow was no longer soft, but fine and sharp as powdered glass. It hissed beneath her boots and swirled in little spirals around her ankles. The trees stood like tall silver ghosts, their branches heavy with frost. She wrapped her shawl tighter, though it did little against the wind that whispered, "Turn back, little one, turn back." But Gerda's heart was warm. The rose she had touched at the old woman's cottage seemed to beat faintly inside her chest, like a tiny ember that refused to go out. She knew that somewhere, through all the ice and storm, Kai was waiting, though he did not know he was lost. When the forest thinned, Gerda came to a wide plain where snow drifted in waves. A crow perched upon a bent signpost, black against the white. He cocked his head and watched her with one bright eye. "Good day," said Gerda politely. "Have you seen a boy pass this way? Fair hair, blue eyes, a small red scarf." The crow blinked. A boy, perhaps. There was one not long ago who rode with a lady in a sleigh. She glittered like frost and left no tracks. Gerda's heart quickened. "The Snow Queen?" The crow nodded gravely. "Yes, she went north, where even the rivers sleep beneath the ice. But you will need help to follow her." "I will manage," said Gerda. The crow studied her face, then gave a small bow. "You have a kind heart. That matters more than strength. Go to the old castle beyond the birch wood. My sweetheart, the tame crow, lives there. She will guide you further." Gerda thanked him and walked on, her feet sinking into the drifts. The air smelled of pine and distant smoke. When at last she saw the castle, its towers looked carved from pale stone and silence. Inside she found warmth and candlelight, and a plump tame crow who fluttered down to greet her. "So you're the child looking for her friend," said the tame crow. "We have heard of you. Sit, and I'll tell you what we know." Gerda sat on a cushion, her hands around a mug of steaming broth. The crow told her that the Snow Queen's palace lay far beyond the human world, in the region of the northern lights. But between here and there, the crow said, is a land of robbers and reindeer, and you will need more than courage to cross it. Gerda smiled faintly. "Then I will need friends." The tame crow tilted her head. "Perhaps you shall find some on the way." The next morning, wrapped in a fur cloak the crows had found for her, Gerda set off again. The sky was low and grey. Soon, dark pine trees closed around her like a whispering crowd. The snow underfoot grew crusted and uneven. She walked until her legs ached, and when she finally rested against a tree, the world seemed to hum softly, the way a kettle hums before it sings. She was not alone. From behind a thicket came a sound like the rustle of dry leaves and the low snort of animals. A sleigh emerged, drawn by shaggy ponies. A girl in fur boots stood on the runners, her eyes bright and wild. "Who are you?" the girl called. "I'm Gerda. I'm looking for my friend Kai." The girl grinned. "Then climb in. I'm the robber girl. I know these woods. You'll freeze if you walk." Gerda hesitated, but the girl's smile, fierce and curious, held no cruelty. She climbed into the sleigh, and they sped away through the forest, the runners hissing on the snow. They rode until dusk, when the trees opened to a clearing. Tents of hides were set in a circle, smoke curling from holes at the top. Reindeer stood tethered, their antlers frosted with ice. The robber girl led Gerda to a small fire and offered her bread and berries. "You're brave," said the girl, watching the sparks rise. "No one goes north unless they must." "I must," said Gerda simply. The robber girl nodded. "Then take my reindeer. He knows the way to the Snow Queen's realm. He'll run like the wind." Gerda looked at her in wonder. "Why would you help me?" The girl shrugged. "Because you remind me of the spring, and I miss it." They shared a quiet meal by the fire, and when dawn came pale and blue, the robber girl brought the reindeer, his eyes gentle and patient. "Go," she said. Follow the lights that dance in the northern sky." Gerda hugged her, whispering, "Thank you." Then she climbed onto the reindeer's back, and they set off through the snow, hooves barely touching the ground. They rode over frozen lakes where the ice shone like glass, through forests where every branch glittered like crystal, and across mountains that glowed with soft blue light. The air grew thinner, sharper. Above them, the sky shimmered with ribbons of green and gold, the aurora, silent and alive. At last they reached a vast plain of snow, so bright it seemed to glow from within. In the distance stood a palace, its towers rising like spears of ice, its windows glittering with frozen fire. The reindeer stopped and bowed his head. "This is as far as I can go," he said softly. "My feet would freeze upon that floor. The Snow Queen's palace belongs to no living creature." Gerda slid down and stroked his muzzle. "You've brought me home," she said. The reindeer touched his nose to her cheek, leaving a spark of warmth behind, then turned back toward the south. Gerda stood alone before the gate of ice. The wind here was so cold it sang, a long high note that wrapped around her like glass threads. She pushed the door open, and it swung soundlessly. Inside, the halls were vast and empty, their walls clear as crystal. Each step echoed like a drop of water. At the heart of the palace lay a lake frozen smooth as a mirror. Upon it sat Kai. His skin was pale as snow, his eyes distant and calm. In his hands he held small shards of ice, fitting them together in intricate patterns. "Kai," whispered Gerda. He did not look up. She knelt beside him, her tears falling onto his hands. Each tear sizzled, bright and warm, melting the shards of ice. "Kai, it's me, Gerda." Still he did not speak, but when one of her tears touched his heart, it sank deep, and something cracked within him. The fragment of the wicked mirror slipped away, and warmth flooded back through his veins. He blinked, then looked at her in astonishment. "Gerda, where have I been?" She smiled through tears. "Far away, but you're home now." The air around them shimmered. The ice began to soften, the mirrors to melt. Above them, the roof of the palace opened to the sky, and snowflakes drifted down, no longer sharp, but soft and silent. The Snow Queen's realm was breaking apart, not in anger, but in release. The cold had done its work. Now, warmth had come to finish it. Hand in hand, Gerda and Kai stepped out into the pale dawn. Behind them, the palace faded like a dream at morning. Before them stretched the long road home, winding through silver light and soft snow. And as they walked, every step seemed easier than the last, for the warmth in their hearts was enough to melt all the winter left in the world. The city slept under a violet sky. The lamps along the river shone like tiny stars, their reflections trembling in the dark water. Bells tolled softly in the distance, counting the hours between waking and dream. From the highest tower in the square rose a statue so bright it seemed to hold the last light of day, the Happy Prince. He stood upon a tall column of white stone, covered from head to foot in thin leaves of gold. 2 bright sapphires shone in place of eyes, and a large red ruby gleamed upon his sword's hilt. When the sun rose, he glowed with warmth. When the moon appeared, he shimmered faintly, as if remembering the daylight. In life, the prince had never known sorrow. He had lived in a palace where no sadness was allowed to enter. By decree, grief was banished. Laughter echoed through the halls, and every day was filled with music and feasts. He had called himself happy, and everyone had agreed that he was. But now, high above the city, where the wind touched him and the stars whispered their secrets, the Happy Prince saw what he had never seen before. From his pedestal, he could look down over every roof and street. He saw the narrow alleys where the poor huddled under rags for warmth. He saw hungry children crying beside darkened windows. He saw the river's cold gleam over unlit bridges, and because his heart, once made of flesh, had been replaced with lead, he could not weep, but he wished he could. Late one evening, when the moon was clear and the air cool, a small swallow flew over the city. He was on his way south, to Egypt, where the warm winds sang in the reeds, and the great river wound like a silver snake through the sands. Behind him were the long summer days, the laughter of other swallows, and a courtship that had ended too soon. He had stopped by the great golden statue, simply to rest for the night. "A fine perch," he said aloud, folding his wings. "This will do until morning." He tucked his head beneath his wing and closed his eyes. But just as he was drifting into sleep, a drop of water fell upon him, then another and another. He blinked in surprise and looked up. The sky was perfectly clear. No rain fell. "What a strange thing," he murmured. "There isn't a cloud in sight, and yet it's raining." He looked up again and gasped. The golden statue above him was weeping. Tears flowed down its gilded cheeks, sparkling as they fell. "Who are you?" asked the swallow. "I am the happy prince," said the statue. "But I am not happy now." The swallow tilted his head. "Then why do you weep?" "Because I see all the sadness of my city," said the prince softly. "I see mothers comforting hungry children. I see workers who suffer while I stand here covered in gold. When I lived and had a human heart, I did not know these things. I lived behind high walls. Now I can see them all. And though my heart is made of lead, it feels as heavy as sorrow itself." The swallow's feathers ruffled in the wind. He thought of the wide deserts waiting for him, of the reeds along the Nile. But there was something about the statue's voice, gentle, quiet, filled with longing, that made him stay a little longer. "Far below," said the prince, "in a narrow street, I see a seamstress. Her fingers are pricked and bleeding from sewing. Her little boy lies ill in bed, his cheeks flushed with fever. He asks for oranges, but she has only water from the river. Swallow, will you not take her my ruby? It shines upon my sword. She will sell it and buy what she needs." The swallow hesitated. "I must go to Egypt," he said. "My friends are waiting there. The Nile glows under the moon, and the great king's tombs are full of sleeping kings. Tomorrow they will fly far over the desert." "One night, swallow," said the prince. "Only one night." The bird looked up at the golden face. It was calm and kind. "It is very cold here," said the swallow softly, "but I will stay one night with you and be your messenger." He pecked the great ruby loose from the hilt of the prince's sword. The gem fell into his little claws, heavy and red as a drop of sunset. Then he spread his wings and flew low over the city. He passed over the cathedral tower, where white marble angels stood carved in silence. He passed over the river, which glimmered faintly beneath the moon. He passed over the narrow streets, where sleeping cats curled beside doorways and the lamplighters were already at rest. At last he found the poor house, its windows dull with frost. Through a crack in the shutters, he saw the seamstress bending over her work, her candle nearly gone. In the corner lay her boy, tossing in a fever dream. The swallow fluttered in, set the ruby beside the thimble, and fanned the boy's brow gently with his wings. The child sighed and drifted into calm sleep. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince. "I did as you asked," he said. "The boy is sleeping now," and the woman smiled in her dreams. "Thank you, little swallow," said the prince. "You have made me glad once more." The swallow settled at his feet. "It is curious," he said, "but I am not so cold now, though it is freezing." "That is because you have done a good thing," said the prince. The swallow smiled faintly, folding his wings. "Strange," he murmured. "It feels like summer inside my heart." He stayed beside the golden statue that night, and though frost fell softly over the city, the air around the tower seemed just a little warmer. High above, The happy prince gazed down upon the quiet streets, and the moonlight caught on his golden tears. In the distance, a clock struck midnight, slow, deep, and full of dreaming. The swallow closed his eyes, thinking only to rest a moment before dawn. But in the gentle silence, a voice spoke again. "Swallow," said the happy prince, "there is another thing I must ask of you." The dawn came pale and quiet. A thin mist hung over the river, softening the outlines of roofs and bridges. The swallow stirred beneath the golden statue and stretched his wings, expecting to continue his flight toward the south. But when he looked up, the happy prince's sapphire eyes shone down upon him with such kindness that he could not leave at once. "Good morning, prince," he chirped softly. "The air smells of frost, but the sun will soon rise. Shall I bid you farewell now?" "Swallow," said the statue gently, "will you not stay another night? There is more sorrow in my city than one ruby can heal." The little bird hesitated. His friends were already far along the Nile, where reeds swayed in warm breezes and dragonflies glittered over blue water. Yet the voice of the happy prince carried a weight of love that drew him close again. "Tell me what you see," said the swallow. "Far away," replied the prince, "beyond the square and the river, there is a small attic beneath a slate roof. Through its window I can see a young writer, thin and weary. He leans over his desk trying to finish a play for the theater. His hands are numb with cold, and there is no fire in his grate. The paper on which he writes curls from his breath, and hunger has hollowed his cheeks." The swallow bowed his head. "What shall I bring him?" "Take one of my sapphire eyes," said the happy prince. "It will buy firewood and bread, and he may finish his play." The swallow gasped. "Your eye? But then you will not see." "I can see clearly enough through the eyes of kindness," said the prince. "Please, dear swallow, take it." So the swallow pecked gently at the golden face and removed one of the sapphires. It gleamed in his beak like a drop of the morning sky. Then he flew through the pale air, gliding over chimneys and rooftops until he found the narrow attic. The window was cracked. He slipped inside. The young man had fallen asleep upon his desk, his head resting on his arm. His candle burned low. The swallow placed the sapphire beside the ink bottle and then flew once around the room, fanning warm air over the man's face. The writer stirred, smiled faintly in his dream, and whispered, "Ah, how beautiful the world is when spring returns." The swallow flew back through the grey air to the tower. "I have done as you asked," he said. "But now you have only one eye left, and it makes me sad to see you so changed." "Do not grieve for me," said the happy prince. "What I have given lives on in their joy." The day passed, bright and cold. Children played in the square below, throwing snowballs and chasing one another's laughter. The swallow perched beside the statue's shoulder, telling stories of his travels, of the desert winds, the temples half buried in sand, the camels moving like ships through golden dunes. The prince listened in silence, and when night fell again, he spoke once more. "Swallow," he said softly, "far down in the city, I see a little match girl. She has dropped her matches into the gutter. Her father will scold her if she returns without coins. She has no shoes, and her feet are blue with cold. Please, take her my other eye." The swallow trembled. "But if I take it, dear prince, you will be blind." "Even then, I shall see with my heart," said the statue, "and that will be enough." So the swallow plucked out the prince's remaining eye. The sapphire shone like a tear caught in the moonlight. He carried it swiftly through the falling snow until he reached the corner where the little girl crouched weeping quietly beside the frozen gutter. "Don't cry," whispered the swallow. He dropped the sapphire into her trembling hand. It glittered in the darkness, and she gasped, "What a lovely stone! I can sell it and buy bread for my family." She ran off, smiling for the first time that night. The swallow returned to the happy prince, his wings heavy with frost. "You are blind now," he said softly, "but you have given joy to many. "And you, my friend," said the prince, "have given me the gift of seeing what goodness truly means." The wind rose, sighing through the streets. Snow began to fall again, lightly, like white petals drifting from unseen trees. The swallow shivered, but he did not move from his perch. "Prince," he said, "now that you cannot see, let me stay beside you always. I will be your eyes." The happy prince smiled in the silence. "Yes, dear swallow, tell me what you see." "I see the river, dark and wide," said the swallow, "and the lanterns of fishermen trembling on its surface. I see the great cathedral with its arches lost in shadow. I see poor houses where faces glow faintly by the light of candles, and in one window I see a mother singing her child to sleep." The prince listened, and the city seemed gentler in his heart. Night after night, the swallow flew over the streets, carrying tiny pieces of gold leaf from the statue and dropping them into the hands of the poor. Wherever he went, a little warmth followed, a smile, a spark in a hearth, a light rekindled in weary eyes. Soon the statue lost its gleam. The fine gold that had once covered him was gone, leaving dull grey lead beneath. Yet the people who passed below said, "How beautiful the prince looks, even in winter. The snow seems to love him." The swallow's wings grew weaker, frost gathered at their tips, and still he would not fly south. "I am warm beside you," he told the prince. "My friends are far away, but my heart is here." And though the wind howled through the night, the little bird tucked himself under the prince's arm, dreaming of warm skies and endless light. Above them, the stars burned steadily, like candles that never went out. Winter deepened, quiet and unbroken. The river froze, the streets turned to silver glass, and every breath rose as mist before fading into the sky. The city seemed to sleep beneath a great white veil. Only the statue of the happy prince and the small swallow at his feet remained awake through the long nights. The swallow was no longer strong enough to fly far. His wings quivered with every gust of wind, and frost clung to his feathers like dusted pearls. Yet he refused to leave the prince. Each day he told him what he could see: the pale light upon the rooftops, the smoke curling from chimneys, the rare laughter that still rose from the streets below. "I see hope," the swallow said one morning, his voice faint but cheerful. "It comes and goes like sunlight through cloud, but it is there." "That is enough," said the happy prince. "To see hope, even in the cold, is to see the soul of the city." For a while they were silent, listening to the wind. The statue's gold was gone. The sapphires were gone. Only dull lead remained, though his face still seemed to glow faintly, as if lit from within. "Swallow," said the prince at last, "you have been my messenger, my eyes, my heart. But now you must rest. Fly away to Egypt, my friend. Warm your wings in the sun and sing once more above the river Nile." The swallow looked up at him, trembling. "I cannot," he said softly. "The desert is too far now, and besides, I have grown to love this city because you loved it. I will stay with you until the end." The happy prince would have wept if he could. "Then stay," he said gently, "but stay in peace." That evening, the city lights flickered one by one, as if the world itself were blinking in drowsy reverence. The air smelled faintly of snow and wood smoke, and in the distance, a church bell rang, deep, slow, echoing like a heartbeat. The swallow nestled closer to the statue's shoulder. "Prince," he whispered, "I have one last message to deliver before I rest." "What is it, dear swallow?" "I have seen the poor children under the bridge," said the bird, his voice no louder than falling snow. "They have no fire, and the cold bites their hands. May I take one more piece of your gold, a flake perhaps, to warm them?" The happy prince smiled through the gathering frost. "My body is bare, little one, but take my heart. It is made of lead, yet it may still bring warmth where it is needed most." The swallow shook his head. No, my prince, your heart must stay where it is. It has done enough. He spread his wings once more and flew low over the sleeping city. His flight was slow, uncertain, but he managed to reach the bridge. There he fanned his wings above the children, letting a few loose feathers fall like soft snow upon their faces. They stirred and smiled in their dreams, feeling a warmth they could not name. When the swallow returned, the first light of dawn was spreading through the clouds. He perched once more upon the prince's shoulder. "I have done it," he whispered. "They are sleeping peacefully now." "I am glad," said the prince. "You have carried kindness across this city like a star." The swallow sighed. "My work is finished, and now I must sleep." He kissed the prince lightly on the lips, a faint brush of feathers against cold metal, and then he fell at the statue's feet. At that very moment, a strange sound echoed through the air. A clear, sudden crack. The statue's heart had split in two. It was too cold to break from frost, and too strong to break from weight. It had broken from love. When the townspeople came out the next morning, the world was shining and still. The mayor and his council looked up at the statue and frowned. "How shabby he has become," said one. "He is no longer golden, but grey." "And that poor bird," said another, "has died at his feet. How unsightly." "Remove them both," said the mayor. "We must have a new statue, perhaps of myself." And so they took down the happy prince and the little swallow. The heart, heavy and dull, they found had broken in two. They threw it into the pile of rubbish where the dead bird already lay. But when the furnace was lit to melt the statue, the leaden heart refused to burn. It was thrown aside once more, and so it lay there, among ashes and quiet things, forgotten by the world but not by heaven. For in that moment, a voice spoke softly in the cold morning air. It came from everywhere and nowhere, like sunlight upon snow. "Bring me the two most precious things in the city," said the voice. And the angels came, unseen, carrying the broken heart and the tiny bird. "Have they done well?" one asked. "Yes," said the voice. "In my garden, this little bird shall sing forevermore, and the happy prince shall stand beside me, joyful in truth." And though the city went on with its days with bells and smoke and weary footsteps, high above it, where no frost could reach, a golden light shone softly through the clouds. For love had taken flight, and winter had turned to morning. Long ago, in a distant kingdom by the sea, there lived an emperor whose palace was the most splendid in all the world. Its walls were made of pure porcelain, so thin and shining that they seemed woven from moonlight itself. In the gardens, silver bells chimed on every branch, and the air was filled with the fragrance of jasmine and sweet pine. Everywhere the eye could rest, there was wonder, fountains shaped like dragons that whispered water instead of fire, and paths paved with shells that glimmered like stars. But among all the emperor's treasures, none was as beloved as the great garden that stretched to the very edge of the forest. There, at the place where marble gave way to moss, lived a small nightingale. Her feathers were soft grey, her eyes clear and kind, and her song, oh, her song was like the soul of the world turned into sound. When she sang, the river slowed its current to listen, and the wind itself held its breath. Those who heard her never forgot. Fishermen paused on the waves, their oars still. Travellers in the forest stopped and felt tears rise without knowing why. Even the bamboo bent slightly, as though bowing before the melody. Yet the emperor had never heard her. He was busy with banquets and ceremonies, with gifts and visitors who praised the splendor of his palace. Scholars wrote long poems about his greatness, and travelers from distant lands sent back stories of his wonders. And among those stories, they spoke of the nightingale. "There is, in the emperor's garden," they wrote, "a bird whose song is sweeter than the stars, a song that brings peace to the heart." When the emperor read this, he sat up straight upon his jade throne. "A bird," he said, And in my garden, why have I not heard her? None of his courtiers knew. They bowed low, confused and fearful. Perhaps she does not exist, Majesty, one said softly. The emperor frowned. Everything that is written of my empire must be true. Find this nightingale at once. Tonight she will sing for me. The courtiers bowed and hurried away, their silk robes whispering like frightened leaves. They searched the palace, the groves, the lantern-lit lakes, but none of them had ever heard of such a bird. Finally, in the kitchen, a scullery maid looked up from her washing and said, "Oh yes, I know the nightingale. Every evening, when I go to fetch water beyond the garden wall, I hear her sing. Her voice makes me forget I am tired." The courtiers looked at one another in surprise. "Lead us to her," they commanded. The girl nodded shyly and guided them through the maze of flowering trees. The sky was deepening into dusk. The scent of magnolia hung heavy in the air. Somewhere beyond the last hedge, a song began to rise, soft at first, like the sigh of a dream, then clearer, sweeter, until the very air trembled with its beauty. The courtiers stopped in awe. "Is that she?" one whispered. "Yes," said the maid, smiling. "That is the nightingale." They followed the sound through the leaves until they found her, a small grey bird perched upon a branch, singing with her whole heart. The courtiers bowed hastily. "Most noble creature," said one, "you must come with us to the palace. The emperor desires to hear your song." The nightingale tilted her head. "The emperor?" she said. "I sing for the trees, for the river, for the wind that travels far. But if the emperor wishes to hear me, I will gladly go." And so, that evening, she was carried to the palace in great ceremony. They placed her in a golden cage, lined with silk threads, and set upon a table of carved jade. Candles burned in crystal holders, and courtiers gathered in glittering rows. The emperor himself sat upon his throne, his robe woven with the image of the sun. When all was still, he nodded. "Sing," he said. The nightingale looked around the vast room. She felt the cool marble under her feet, saw the painted ceilings and the endless faces staring. Then she closed her eyes and sang. Her song rose softly, like water flowing over smooth stones. It filled the air with memories of moonlight on bamboo leaves, of waves on the distant shore, of hearts learning to hope again. When she finished, there was silence. No one moved. Then the emperor's eyes shone with tears. "She has touched my soul," he said quietly. The courtiers clapped their hands. "What a marvel! What a treasure!" they cried. The emperor turned to the chief keeper of birds. "Let her stay here," he said. "She shall have 12 servants and a golden perch. She shall sing whenever I wish." And so the nightingale stayed at the palace. She sang for the emperor, for his guests, for the nobles and the servants. But the halls of marble did not echo like the forest. The air was heavy with incense, not fresh with pine. The candles flickered instead of starlight. Still, she sang, for kindness, not for praise. Her song was softer now, wistful, like a breeze remembering spring. But outside the palace walls, another sound began to grow. A strange humming, mechanical and bright. For one day, a box arrived from the Emperor of Japan. Inside was a gift, a mechanical nightingale, covered in jewels, its tail set with sapphires, its wings of silver foil. When wound, it sang perfectly, every note clear, precise and unchanging. The emperor smiled in delight. "How wonderful," he said. "It sings as beautifully as the real one, and it never tires." The courtiers agreed at once. How marvelous, how convenient. The real nightingale watched quietly from her perch. The jeweled bird sang again, flawless, glittering, soulless. That night, when the candles burned low, she looked toward the window where a sliver of moonlight touched the sill. "I think," she whispered to herself, that I miss the forest. She spread her wings and flew into the cool darkness beyond the palace walls, her song fading like a sigh into the night. In the morning, when the courtiers found the golden perch empty, they hurried to the emperor in alarm. "She is gone," they cried. "The real bird has flown." The emperor frowned, then looked at his jeweled gift. "Then let this one sing for me instead," he said. "It is the same." And the jeweled bird sang, perfectly, endlessly, without heart. The jeweled nightingale stood upon its golden perch, gleaming in the morning light. Each feather shone with a different color: ruby red, sapphire blue, emerald green. When wound with a small silver key, it sang a tune of perfect rhythm, bright, exact, and identical each time. The emperor listened with delight. The courtiers clapped their hands and nodded in rhythm. "Marvelous," they said. "Every note so pure, so exact. Not a single one out of place." The real nightingale had sung of the forest, of waves and wind and moonlight. The mechanical bird sang of precision and polish, and though its sound was sharp and bright, there was no scent of pine, no hum of the sea, no breath of heart. Still, the court rejoiced. For days and weeks the mechanical bird sang from morning till night. Poets wrote verses in its honor. The emperor presented it with a golden ribbon to wear around its neck. "You shall be called the chief singer of the imperial bedchamber," he said. The jeweled bird sang once more, and the courtiers nodded solemnly. But deep down in the palace gardens, the flowers missed the real nightingale. They missed her song that changed with the wind, her voice that rose with the sun and softened at dusk. The bamboo bent slightly, as if sighing. "It is not the same," they whispered. Soon, the jeweled bird began to wear out. Its music box clicked faintly. The tune faltered, and the silver feathers stiffened with use. One morning, just as the emperor lifted the winding key, a sharp snap rang through the hall. The mechanism jammed. The jeweled nightingale stopped mid-song, its beak open, its glittering eyes frozen. "Oh!" cried the courtiers, wringing their hands. "What misfortune! The song is gone." The royal watchmaker examined it gravely. "It can be repaired," he said, "but only so often. The spring is worn thin. It must be played sparingly, no more than once a year." The emperor's smile faded. "Once a year," he repeated softly. And so the mechanical bird was placed upon a velvet cushion beside the emperor's bed. It was admired as a relic, dusted every day, wound only on the feast of the new year. At first, the emperor missed the old song but said nothing. The courtiers feared to mention the real nightingale, for she had flown far beyond the city walls. Some believed she had perished in the forest. Others said she had returned to the sea. Years passed. The emperor grew older, and his eyes dimmed. His face, once bright as jade, turned pale as paper. He walked the marble halls more slowly now, leaning upon a cane carved with dragons. One winter's night, when snow drifted against the windows and the lamps burned low, the emperor lay in his bed, too weak to rise. Around him stood his courtiers, silent and pale. The air was heavy with the smell of incense and fading lilies. "Bring the physicians," murmured one. "They have come," said another, "and they say he may not see the morning." The emperor's eyes fluttered open. He looked at the jeweled nightingale beside him and whispered, "Sing." The courtiers wound the silver key, and the mechanical bird began its familiar tune. Bright, perfect, and hollow, it echoed through the chamber like the sound of glass striking glass. The emperor closed his eyes. "No," he whispered, "it is too cold." And then he saw something strange. From the shadows of the great hall, figures began to move, silent grey shapes, thin as mist. They came closer, their eyes like polished stones. "Who are you?" he asked weakly. One figure bent low. "We are the memories of your deeds," it said. "We come to speak before you leave." The emperor trembled. "Do not speak," he whispered. "Bring the music back." But the mechanical bird had stopped again. Its spring had broken. The room was still. Then, through the open window, came a sound, soft, clear, and real. It was a song of water over stones, of dawn after long night, of forgiveness. It was the voice of the real nightingale, hovering upon the winter air. She perched upon the sill, her feathers pale in the moonlight, and sang. The grey figures paused, their shapes wavered, dimmed, and then dissolved like smoke in sunlight. The emperor felt warmth return to his heart, faint as the first touch of morning. "Stay," he whispered. "Sing again." The nightingale sang once more, of gardens, of stars, of kindness unforgotten. Her voice filled the room with light, though the lamps had burned out. When dawn came, the courtiers entered quietly. They expected to find the emperor gone, but he was sitting upright, pale yet smiling. The window opened beside him. "Good morning," he said softly. "The sun has risen." The nightingale still perched upon the window frame. "Majesty," she said, "I have sung for you in joy and in sorrow. If you are kind to your people, I will come again when you need me." The emperor bowed his head. "I will remember." She flew away, her song trailing behind her like a silver ribbon in the wind. And though the mechanical bird still sat upon its velvet cushion, silent and still, the palace no longer felt empty. The air was fresh, the windows open, and sometimes, just before dawn, a single true note could be heard from the forest, soft and alive. It was the song of a heart that could never be wound. The palace never forgot the morning. The emperor awoke to birdsong instead of silence, for though the courtiers had not seen her clearly, every servant whispered that the nightingale had come again from the forest, not as a creature of gold and gears, but as breath and heart and truth. From that day, the emperor changed. He walked in his gardens not as a ruler inspecting treasures, but as a man rediscovering life. He noticed the scent of the lotus ponds, the way the dew trembled upon each blade of grass, and the sound of the bamboo tapping together in the wind. Sometimes, when the sun began to set, and the sky turned from gold to lavender, he would pause near the edge of the woods and listen. And there, soft and clear, came the nightingale's song, no longer only of beauty, but of mercy and peace. The courtiers soon grew accustomed to the open windows and the simple joys their emperor now preferred. Gone were the endless feasts and parades. Instead, he invited children to play in the gardens and farmers to rest in the shade of the trees. The people, who had once spoken of him with awe, now spoke of him with affection. At night, when the moon rose like a pale lantern above the sea, the nightingale often returned. She never came close enough to be caught or caged again. She sang from the branch of a pine tree, her voice floating through the air like mist over still water. The emperor would listen alone. "Little bird," he would whisper, "your song has taught me more than all my scholars ever did." And the nightingale would answer, "It is not learning, Majesty. It is remembering." Her song drifted beyond the palace walls, beyond the fields and villages, to the fishermen far out on the waves. They would pause in their rowing and smile, though they could not say why. The nightingale's voice seemed to remind them of home, of quiet mornings, of a world that was still kind. In the years that followed, the mechanical bird was placed within a glass cabinet in the royal hall. Dust settled upon its jeweled feathers, and though it was still wound once a year, its song sounded thin and distant, a pretty echo of something once alive. The courtiers still admired it, but the emperor no longer listened. Instead, he preferred the sound of the night itself, the crickets in the reeds, the waves upon the shore, the whisper of the wind in the willows. He had learned that not all beauty shines. Some glows quietly, like the heart of a flame hidden within the coals. One evening, when his hair was silver and his step slow, the emperor walked again to the edge of the garden. The moon hung low, casting silver over the lake. He stood there for a long while, breathing the cool air, and whispered, "Dear Nightingale, are you still there?" At first, there was only silence. Then, faint and far away, came a single note, clear as a drop of water falling into stillness. The emperor smiled. "You are," he said softly. "I knew you would be." The nightingale alighted on a nearby branch. Her feathers were the same gentle grey, her eyes bright as ever. "Majesty," she said, "I have come because your heart called me. Tell me what it wishes to say." The emperor looked at her, and his eyes shone not with tears, but with gratitude. "I wished only to thank you. You gave me back my life, not through power, but through song. You reminded me that joy can be humble, and that truth needs no jewels." The nightingale bowed her head. "You needed only to listen." She began to sing once more, and the melody wound through the night, low and tender, then rising like the moon itself. It carried the scent of pine and the rhythm of waves. It spoke of endings that were beginnings, and of peace that never fades. The emperor closed his eyes, feeling each note settle gently in his chest. For a long while time seemed to pause. The palace lights dimmed, the sea grew still. Only the song remained, flowing through the world like water through the veins of the earth. When the dawn came, the courtiers found the emperor seated by the lake, calm and smiling. The nightingale was gone, but a feather lay upon his hand, small, grey, and soft as morning mist. They built a small shrine for it among the roses, not as a monument of wealth, but as a promise of remembrance. And in the evenings, when the air grew cool and the stars began to bloom, the people of the city would sometimes hear a faint, sweet song drifting over the walls. Some said it was only the wind, others said it was the nightingale, keeping her promise. And far away, deep in the forest, where moonlight fell through the leaves like silver rain, a small grey bird sang to the quiet world, not for fame, not for praise, but simply because the heart must sing when it is full of love. There was once a beautiful garden that lay behind a tall stone wall at the edge of a small town. It was the kind of garden that seemed to hold the seasons in its hands, full of soft grass that felt like green silk, flowers that shone like jewels, and 12 peach trees that blossomed each spring with clouds of pink and white. When the wind blew, petals fell like snowflakes, and the birds sang so sweetly that the children who passed by the wall would stop and listen. Every afternoon, when the school day ended, those children would find a small gap in the stones, just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside, they laughed and ran and rolled in the grass. They climbed the trees and hung from the branches heavy with blossoms. Their laughter rang through the garden like silver bells, and the flowers nodded in rhythm as if pleased to hear them. For years, the garden and the children lived in perfect friendship. But one day, after a long journey away, the giant who owned the garden returned. He was enormous and proud, with a beard like tangled moss and eyes the color of grey stone. When he reached his gate and saw the children playing, he stopped in astonishment. Then his face darkened like a cloud. "What are you doing in my garden?" he thundered. His voice rolled through the air like distant thunder. The children froze, trembling like leaves in the wind. One small girl dropped her handful of petals. Another hid behind a tree trunk. "My garden is my own," said the giant sternly. "Everyone must understand that. I will allow no one to play here but myself." And so he built a wall even higher than before, sealing every gap with mortar and stone. On the gate, he set a sign that read in great letters, "Trespassers will be punished." The children saw it the next day and turned away in sorrow. They wandered down the road to play in the dusty lanes instead, but it was not the same. There were no birds to sing, no grass soft enough for resting. The world seemed smaller without that hidden piece of wonder. Inside the walls, the garden fell silent. The flowers drooped and the grass turned pale. The birds came no more, for there were no voices to answer their songs. Then came the change. Spring, which visited every other garden in the land, passed the giant's gate and went on her way. She sent her green fingers into the meadows and orchards beyond, but she would not climb over the tall grey wall, and so winter settled in instead. Snow fell thick and silent, blanketing the branches. Frost painted the trees with silver lace. The wind howled and moaned like a lonely flute. Even the peach trees shivered in their sleep. "This garden suits me well," said Winter, striding through the frozen grass. "It belongs to me now." Only once, when the giant opened his window, did he notice how strange it all seemed. The rest of the countryside was alive with color, blossoms, birds, and laughter, but his own garden lay still and white. "What has happened to the seasons?" he muttered. "Why do they not come here?" He tried to cheer himself with a great fire in his hearth, but the warmth did not reach his heart. Every morning he looked out upon his silent garden, and every morning he saw the same thing: snow, frost, and bare branches that never budded. Sometimes he could hear a bird sing far away beyond his wall, and it made him think of something he could not quite remember, a sound like laughter, like spring. Years passed in this way, until even the giant grew tired of his own loneliness. One morning, he awoke to a strange sound. It was faint at first, like the whisper of a dream. Tweet, chirp, tweet. The giant sat up and listened. It had been so long since he had heard birdsong that he could hardly believe his ears. He rose, went to the window, and looked out. Something marvelous had happened. In a far corner of the garden, where the wall was a little broken, a small boy had slipped through. He stood beneath one of the great trees, trying to reach a low branch, and around him the snow had melted. The tree was covered in blossoms once again, and birds circled above, singing as if to welcome him. The giant's heart stirred. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he must be dreaming. "What is this?" he murmured. "Why does the tree bloom there and nowhere else?" He watched as more children appeared through the hole, running across the grass. Wherever they went, the garden awoke. Blossoms opened, grass turned green, and the air filled with light. Only in one place did winter still linger. In the farthest corner, a small boy stood crying. He was too little to climb the tree near him, whose branches were still bare and grey. He stretched out his hands but could not reach. The giant felt a pang in his chest, something soft and aching that he had not known for years. "How selfish I have been," he said quietly. "Now I know why spring would not come." He put on his great cloak and stepped into the garden, but when the children saw him, they screamed and ran away, and with them went the sunlight and the birds. The garden turned white again. Only the little boy did not run, for he was crying so hard that he did not see the giant's shadow fall upon him. The giant approached slowly, his voice gentle for the first time. "Why are you weeping, little one?" The boy looked up through his tears. "I cannot climb this tree," he said, "and I wanted to see the blossoms." The giant's heart melted completely. "Then come, child," he said softly, "and I will lift you." He bent down, took the boy in his great hands, and placed him in the branches. The moment the boy touched the tree, it burst into bloom. Birds began to sing, and golden light flooded the garden. The giant's eyes filled with tears, though they were warm ones this time. "How wonderful," he whispered. "The garden is alive again." When the other children saw that he meant no harm, they ran back, laughing and dancing. Spring followed them like a bright spirit, and everywhere she stepped, flowers awakened. The giant smiled. "It is your garden now, my children," he said. And though the great wall still stood, he opened a wide gate within it, so that any child might enter freely. Outside, the people of the town saw the change and marveled, for the air over the giant's house was now full of birds and light. Inside, the giant sat beneath the blooming tree, watching the children play. "I was selfish once," he said softly, "but now my heart is as wide as my garden." And Winter, seeing she was no longer needed, slipped quietly away. Each morning after that day, the giant awoke to the sound of laughter and the bright flutter of wings. The once silent garden had come alive. Every tree wore a crown of blossoms, every blade of grass shone with dew, and the air rang with the soft music of birds greeting the sun. Children ran through the paths like sunlight through leaves, their voices light and full of wonder. Some climbed the peach trees, gathering the petals that fell like pink snow. Others wove garlands of daisies to crown the youngest among them. The giant would sit quietly in his great chair, smiling as he watched, his heart as gentle as the spring air. His garden, once a place of loneliness, had become a small paradise, a home not for one but for all. The townspeople who passed the wall would stop to listen. They heard laughter, the hum of bees, and sometimes the deep, quiet sound of the giant's contented sigh. The heavy gates that had once warned trespassers will be punished now stood wide open, and the sign was gone. In its place, wildflowers grew, climbing the stones in golden ribbons. Every afternoon, when the sun began to dip and the shadows grew long, the children would gather around the giant's chair. He would tell them stories, not of kings or battles, but of clouds shaped like ships, and of stars that whispered to one another across the night. He told them of the time before they came, when the garden had slept under the spell of winter. "It was a lonely time," he would say, "and I did not understand that joy cannot live behind walls." The children would listen with wide eyes, leaning against his knees, the scent of peach blossoms drifting through the air. As the years passed, the giant grew older, his beard whiter, his hands slower, yet the garden seemed to grow even more beautiful, as if it loved him for his kindness. The trees leaned closer to his chair, and birds perched upon his shoulders without fear. Every spring, the same miracle returned. The earth woke from its slumber, and the garden became young again. But one thing puzzled the giant. Though all the children came day after day, laughing and playing, he never again saw the little boy he had lifted into the tree that first morning. "Where is my small friend?" he would ask the children. "We don't know," they would answer. "We've never seen him since that day." The giant would nod and smile, though his eyes would grow thoughtful. "He must have found a garden even lovelier than this," he would say. But in his heart, he missed the boy's bright eyes and soft voice. One spring morning, when the air smelled of rain and honey, the giant sat by his window. The garden was more beautiful than ever. Birds wheeled through the blue sky, flowers swayed in the gentle wind, and laughter drifted like music from the farthest trees. "It is truly spring," he whispered, "everywhere but in my heart, which feels a little older today." He walked slowly through the grass, greeting each tree as an old friend. He noticed that every branch was heavy with blossoms, except one, a small tree in the farthest corner, still bare and grey. "That is strange," he murmured. "It stands where the little boy once played." He moved closer, his steps soft on the grass. Then he stopped, for a great wonder filled his eyes. The tree was no longer bare. Its branches were covered in white blossoms brighter than snow, and golden fruit glowed among the leaves. Beneath it stood the little boy himself, smiling gently, with light around him as warm as morning. The giant's heart leapt. "You have come back," he cried, joy breaking in his voice. "Where have you been all these years?" The boy looked at him and said softly, "You let me play in your garden once, giant. Today, I have come to invite you into mine." The giant's eyes filled with tears. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed by peace. "Your garden," he whispered. "Tell me where it is, dear child, and I shall come at once." The boy smiled and pointed upward, toward a sky so bright it seemed alive. "It is far beyond these walls," he said, "where the seasons never fade." A breeze stirred the petals, carrying the scent of unseen flowers. The giant's eyes shone like the morning sky. "Yes," he said softly, "I think I understand." When the children came that afternoon, they found the giant lying beneath a tree, surrounded by blossoms. His face was calm, and his hands rested gently upon the grass. They did not cry. The garden was too peaceful for sorrow. The sunlight fell like blessing, and a soft wind played among the leaves. "Look," said one of the children. "He has a smile on his face." And above them, in the highest branches, the flowers shone brighter than ever, as though spring itself had bent down to watch over its friend. From that day, the children still came to play in the garden. They said it was the most beautiful place in the world, full of laughter, peace, and a kindness that never faded, not even in winter. And if you walked there at dusk, you might have heard the faint echo of a deep voice, gentle as the earth. "It is your garden now, my children." The garden glowed with an everlasting peace. Though the giant's chair stood empty now, the children still came each afternoon, carrying laughter and songs as gifts for the trees. The flowers swayed to their joy. The birds sang as if to keep his memory alive. The wall remained open, its stones wrapped in vines. The gate creaked softly in the wind, no longer guarding anything but the warmth of remembrance. The people of the town called it the Giant's Garden of Spring, and none who entered ever left without feeling gentler in heart. For though the giant himself was gone, something of him remained in the stillness beneath the blossoms, in the kindness that lingered like fragrance after rain. Each season returned with its own grace. In summer, the air shimmered with bees. In autumn, golden leaves drifted across the grass like whispers. Even in winter, the garden was beautiful, quiet and patient, blanketed with snow that seemed to glow from within. And sometimes, when the dusk deepened and the first stars appeared, the children said they could hear his voice, soft as wind in the branches. "Play on, my little friends. This garden is yours." One winter evening, as snow began to fall, a small child entered through the open gate. He was younger than the others, no more than 7, and his feet were bare against the cold. Yet the snow did not cling to him. Wherever he stepped, the grass turned green and the frost melted away. The other children stopped their play and watched in wonder. "Who are you?" they whispered. The child smiled but did not answer. He walked slowly across the garden until he reached the great tree in the far corner, the same tree beneath which the giant had last been seen. Its branches were heavy with blossoms even in the heart of winter, and golden fruit shone softly through the snow. The child placed his hand upon the trunk, and a faint light spread through the branches like sunrise caught in crystal. The wind seemed to still. The snowflakes hung motionless in the air. For a long moment, everything was quiet, so quiet that the children could hear their own hearts beating. Then, from among the flowers, a deep, gentle voice spoke, the voice of the giant, warm and kind as the earth beneath spring rain. "Little one," it said, "you have come back to play." The boy looked upward, his smile full of light. "I have come to keep my promise," he said. The children stared in amazement, for though they saw no shape in the air, they felt a presence vast and peaceful, as if the garden itself had begun to breathe. The blossoms trembled, and a golden petal drifted down, landing softly in the child's open hand. He held it for a moment, then released it to the wind. It floated upward, glowing, until it vanished into the sky. The boy turned to the others. "He is not gone," he said softly. "He is the garden now, The sun on the leaves, the laughter in the branches, the kindness in your hearts. And as he spoke, the snow melted completely. The grass shone wet and new, the air filled with the scent of spring. Every bird burst into song at once, a chorus so full and bright that even the clouds seemed to open wider to listen. The children began to laugh again, their voices mingling with the music of wings and wind. They danced beneath the flowering trees, their footprints leaving trails of green where moments before there had been frost. The boy watched them for a little while, then walked slowly toward the gate. None of them saw him leave. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, like a sunbeam slipping behind a cloud. But near the place where he had stood, something new had grown, a single white rose blooming out of the snow, its petals shaped like small hands folded in prayer. The children gathered around it in awe. "He will always come back," one whispered, "every spring, every morning, in every kindness." And so it was. From that day forward, no one called it the selfish giant's garden any longer. It became known simply as the Garden of Joy, a place where laughter never faded and where the air itself seemed to remember the touch of love. In the evenings, when the last light faded and the first stars began to blink awake, the people of the town would often pause outside its walls. They would hear the wind move gently through the branches, carrying the sound of distant play, and think, there is peace there, a peace made of forgiveness and the laughter of children, and a giant's heart that finally found its spring. And sometimes, in that tender hour between twilight and night, when the garden glowed faintly under the moon, one could almost see a tall, gentle figure walking among the trees, smiling down at the children who played beneath the blossoms, as though joy itself had taken shape, quietly watching over the world. Far to the east, beyond the mountains and the blue horizon, there lived a young prince who dreamed of the world beyond his palace walls. His name was Alaric, and though he possessed every comfort, silks, music, and gold, his heart longed for something greater, something hidden in the whispering winds. He would often stand upon the marble balcony at dusk, his eyes tracing the path of clouds drifting westward. "They travel farther than any man," he would murmur. "They see the edges of the earth. If only I could follow them." One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, a soft wind rose from the west. It brushed his face like a gentle hand, carrying with it the scent of salt and pine, of rain and faraway lands. "Why do you sigh so deeply, young prince?" asked the wind, its voice low and kind. Alaric smiled faintly. "Because I wish to see what lies beyond the horizon, the places where dreams are born, where the sea touches the stars." The wind laughed, a sound like ripples in still water. "Then come with me. I have danced with storms and sung among the reeds. I know every path the clouds have taken." "How could I follow you?" said Alaric. "I have no wings." "You have a heart," whispered the wind, "and that is enough." That night, the prince could not sleep. The wind sighed through the open window, rustling the curtains like waves against the shore. He rose from his bed, wrapped himself in a cloak, and followed the sound outside. The moon was bright, painting the palace gardens in silver. Every leaf shimmered as if made of glass. In the distance, he saw a figure, tall and cloaked in air, with eyes that gleamed like dewdrops caught in starlight. It was the west wind, restless and ageless. "Are you ready?" she asked. Alaric nodded, his heart quickening. "Then hold fast." Before he could breathe another word, she lifted him into the sky. The world fell away beneath them. The towers, the valleys, the glittering rivers winding like ribbons of light. The stars stretched wide above, and the moon seemed close enough to touch. They flew across lands the prince had only dreamed of. Deserts that shimmered like gold in the dark. Forests so vast their shadows seemed to breathe, and seas that reflected the heavens like mirrors. The air around them was alive, filled with scents of rain, the taste of faraway fruit, the hum of unseen wings. "All this is beautiful," said Alaric, "but where are we going?" "To the Garden of Paradise," replied the wind. "It lies beyond the setting sun, where the world ends and the beginning waits. Few have seen it, for its gates open only to those who travel with both courage and humility." The prince's eyes filled with wonder. "And what grows there?" "Everything that was ever loved," said the wind. "The first flower that bloomed, the first smile, the first dream whispered into the night. It is a place of memory and peace." As they flew, they passed over an island wrapped in mist. Below, waterfalls shone like silver threads, and strange glowing birds circled in the twilight. The prince leaned forward, his heart full of awe. "Is that it?" "Not yet," said the wind gently. "That is the edge of longing. Many rest there, content to dream forever, never reaching beyond." Alaric frowned softly. "Then I will not stop there. I must see what lies further." The wind smiled. "Few say that, and fewer mean it. Hold tight, the air grows thin near the border of paradise." They rose higher, through clouds that shimmered like pearls, until the stars seemed close enough to whisper secrets. The world below was silent, the sleeping ocean of silver. At last they came upon a gate woven of light. Its bars were made of wind itself, shifting and transparent, and behind it stretched a garden that glowed like dawn, filled with colors too gentle for any painter's brush, and scents that stirred memories of home one had never known. "This is the Garden of Paradise," said the wind, "but you cannot enter while you carry the dust of the world. You must first rest." The prince looked through the gate, and his heart ached with longing. Inside, he saw rivers clear as crystal, trees whose leaves sang like harps, and figures moving in peace among the blossoms. "I understand," he said softly, "but may I not see it closer?" The wind touched his hair. "Dream of it tonight, and perhaps the dream will guide you." She laid him gently upon a field of soft moss that glowed faintly beneath the moonlight. The air was warm, carrying the distant scent of the garden beyond the gate. As he closed his eyes, Alaric heard faint music like water falling through stars, and in that melody was a promise that one day, when his heart was as still as morning, the gates would open. The wind whispered, "Rest now, Prince of Wonder. Tomorrow the dawn will call you by name." And so he slept, his breath slow and even, while the west wind kept watch beside him, her cloak shimmering with the colors of unseen worlds, her voice humming softly like a lullaby to the stars. When the young prince awoke, the world around him was changed. The night had folded away like a dream, and morning light lay upon the moss like a veil of gold. The air was sweet with fragrance of flowers unseen, of water that sang softly just beyond hearing. He rose and looked about. The field stretched wide and green, and before him stood a door unlike any other. It was woven of branches, yet glowed with the shimmer of pearl. Every leaf upon it trembled, though there was no wind. Alaric's heart stirred. He felt that something vast awaited him beyond that threshold, something both wondrous and humbling. He stepped forward and laid his hand upon the door. It was warm, like sunlight caught in living wood. The moment he touched it, it opened without sound, and a fragrance unlike any he had ever known drifted through, soft, delicate, endless. He crossed the threshold. The Garden of Paradise spread before him, vast and radiant, yet as gentle as a single breath. The ground shimmered with moss that glowed faintly underfoot, and trees rose in graceful arcs, their branches heavy with blossoms that shimmered like morning dew. Everywhere he looked, life moved in quiet harmony. Butterflies like floating petals drifted through the air. Streams wound between the roots, their waters clear and luminous. murmuring songs that spoke without words. And the light, oh the light, came not from the sun, but from the sky itself, which shone like a living dawn. Alaric stood still, overwhelmed. The beauty did not dazzle. It soothed. It seemed to reach deep into him, reminding him of things he had long forgotten. His first childhood laughter, his mother's voice, the peace of falling asleep under the sound of rain. As he walked deeper into the garden, he noticed that everything seemed to know him. The flowers turned gently toward him as he passed. The streams changed their song, as if greeting an old friend returned. Soon he came to a grove where 3 fountains met. From one rose the sound of laughter, from another the murmur of memory, and from the third a silence so perfect it was music itself. He knelt beside the 3rd fountain and looked into its clear depths. What he saw was not his reflection, but the face of the world. Mountains, oceans, skies, all turning in quiet balance. And within it, for just a moment, he saw himself as part of it all, not greater, not smaller, but belonging. "Do you see?" said a voice beside him. He turned and beheld a woman clothed in light, her hair like the wind in golden fields. Her eyes held both the calm of the sea and the mystery of the stars. She smiled gently. "I am the spirit of the garden," she said. "You have walked far to find this place." Alaric bowed. "It is more beautiful than words could ever tell. Yet I feel that I have been here before." "You have," said the spirit. "Every soul has walked this garden in its dreams before birth and again in longing. It is the memory of peace itself." The prince gazed at her, his heart trembling between awe and joy. "And may I stay here forever?" The spirit's smile deepened, tender and sad. "Not yet, child of the world. The gate opens only for those who carry paradise within them. You must take this vision back, that others may remember it too." The words sank into him like soft rain. "But how shall I remember?" he asked. "When I return to the world, its noise will drown this peace." The spirit reached into the fountain and drew forth a small blossom, white as starlight, trembling with its own soft glow. "This is the flower of memory," she said. "Its scent will remind you, even in sorrow, that peace is never lost, only hidden." She placed it in his hands. The petals were cool, and the fragrance made his heart ache with sweetness. "Go now," she said. "Follow the stream back to the gate. When you wake again, the world will be as it was, but you will see it with different eyes." Alaric bowed low. "I will remember," he whispered. He turned and followed the winding stream. The water whispered to him as he walked, of mountains, of clouds, of all things that rise and fall and rise again. The air grew lighter, the path narrower, until he came once more to the living door. Before stepping through, he looked back one last time. The garden shimmered vast, endless, full of quiet music. Somewhere within, the spirit raised her hand in farewell, and a soft wind carried her voice. "Paradise is not a place, Alaric. It is a moment, and you carry it now." He stepped through the door. The world beyond was dimmer, touched by the grey of dawn. Yet it felt alive in a new way. The moss beneath his feet was damp, the air cool with mist, and every leaf seemed to breathe. He pressed the flower of memory to his heart, closed his eyes and whispered, "I will not forget." The door behind him shimmered once more, then faded like dew in sunlight. The garden was gone, but its peace remained, a quiet radiance glowing inside him. And as the west wind returned to bear him home, she whispered through his hair, "Now you have seen it, not to keep, but to remind." The prince awoke beneath a sky washed in pearl and rose. The light of dawn lay over the mountains like a soft blanket, and the air was cool, touched with the scent of pine and distant rain. For a moment, Alaric did not know where he was. Then he felt the flower in his hand still fresh, still glowing faintly, and the memory of the garden returned like music he could still hear in his bones. The west wind hovered beside him, her form woven of mist and light. "You have seen what few are allowed to see," she whispered. "Now you must carry it back into the waking world." Alaric rose slowly. The moss beneath his feet glimmered as he stepped, and for an instant the very air seemed to hum with peace. "I wish I could stay," he said softly. The garden felt like home. The wind's voice was kind. "You will find it again, not in one place, but in every act of kindness, in every quiet moment when your heart opens. Paradise is not lost to those who remember." The prince nodded, though his eyes were wet with longing. He turned his face to the horizon where the sun was rising, painting the clouds in hues of amber and gold. The petals of the flower of memory quivered in his hand, releasing a fragrance so pure it seemed to lift the very heart. He began to walk. As he descended from the high fields, he saw the world unfolding below him, rivers winding like threads of glass, forests stirring with morning life. He passed a shepherd tending his flock and greeted him with a smile. The man, surprised by the warmth in that glance, felt suddenly lighter, as if the sky itself had come closer. Each person the prince met that morning felt the same. To the tired mother drawing water from the well, he spoke gently and helped lift her bucket. To a group of children chasing a wooden hoop through the dust, he offered laughter and play. The flower at his heart seemed to breathe with each kindness, its glow spreading outward like sunlight across a lake. By the time he reached his city, the air felt different. People paused in their errands. Merchants smiled without knowing why. The fountains sparkled brighter, and birds circled the towers as if some invisible song had returned to the stones. When Alaric entered the palace, the courtiers bowed and greeted him with words of ceremony, but he only smiled. He walked past them to the great balcony, where once he had stood dreaming of faraway lands. Now, looking upon the familiar roofs and gardens, he saw them as though for the first time, touched by the same quiet grace that had filled the Garden of Paradise. He turned to the west wind, who lingered at the edge of the sky. "You were right," he said. "The gate was not the end, but a beginning." The wind laughed softly. "And now you know, every breath, every dawn is a doorway. Remember that." Then she was gone, her laughter fading into the endless blue. The prince placed the flower of memory in a glass vessel filled with water. It did not fade. Its light filled the room, and everyone who entered felt calm and whole. Years passed, and the flower never withered. The prince became a wise ruler, not stern but gentle, guiding his people with patience. He built gardens in every corner of the land, not to copy the one he had seen, but to remind others that beauty lives close to kindness. When storms came, he would walk among the trees, his cloak heavy with rain, whispering to them as if to old friends. And when the sun broke through the clouds, he would pause, close his eyes, and breathe deeply, feeling again the breath of the dawn, that moment between dark and light, where everything begins anew. In his old age, when his hair turned silver and his steps grew slow, the prince often sat beside the flower of memory. The petals still glowed softly, casting gentle light upon the room. Sometimes, as he drifted towards sleep, he would hear a faint song, the rustle of unseen leaves, the sound of a distant fountain, the voice of the spirit of the garden calling his name. One morning, the servants entered and found him seated by the window. His head bowed slightly, his face peaceful. The flower still glimmered upon the table, its petals open to the dawn. They said he looked as though he were listening, and perhaps he was, for beyond the palace walls, a soft wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the scent of blossoms that had no season, and if one stood quietly enough, one could almost hear her voice, the west wind calling gently through the world. Wake, traveler of light, the gates are open once more, and far beyond the horizon, where sky meets eternity, the garden of paradise shone like morning forever renewed. There once was a king and queen who ruled a bright little kingdom surrounded by lakes and meadows. Their castle stood on a hill that caught every sunrise and glittered like a crown in the morning light. Yet for all their riches, one thing was missing from their lives: a child. Every room in the castle waited for laughter that never came. The halls were silent, the gardens too neat, the fountains too perfect. So the queen would walk by the lake each evening, her reflection trembling in the water, and wish softly to the stars. At last, one summer night, when the moon hung low and round, her wish was answered. The queen gave birth to a daughter, small, beautiful, and full of light. The king and queen named her Althea, meaning healing, for her smile seemed to mend every sorrow in an instant. Bells rang through the kingdom, flowers were strewn in the streets, and songs filled the air. But on the day of her christening, a strange thing happened. The king had invited every wise woman and fairy in the land, all but one. Deep in the northern woods lived a sorceress who had been forgotten, or perhaps simply ignored. When she learned of the slight, her heart grew cold. She appeared at the castle uninvited, her cloak trailing mist, her eyes like pale glass. The court fell silent. "So," she said, "a child has come to brighten your halls. Let her be as light as you please, lighter than laughter, lighter than love, so light that she may never touch the earth again." Before anyone could speak, the air shimmered, and the sorceress was gone. The queen gathered her baby close, but the curse had already taken hold. When the nurse tried to lay the infant in her cradle, she did not rest upon the blankets. She drifted upward, giggling softly, her tiny hands reaching for the ceiling. The king cried out in alarm, and the queen's tears sparkled in the air like dew, floating upward with her child. They tried everything: ribbons tied to her ankles, golden cords from the chandeliers, but nothing could keep her down for long. She was weightless, free as a feather, untouched by gravity or sorrow. As she grew, it became clear that her lightness was not only of body but of heart. Althea never frowned, never wept, never worried. When others stumbled, she floated above their troubles, laughing like wind chimes in a breeze. The people adored her, yet pitied her too. For though her laughter was bright, it was hollow. She did not understand tears or the tender ache of care. She could not feel the pull of earth, neither its sadness nor its peace. She spent her days drifting through the palace halls, her hair a golden cloud around her. Servants followed with long silken cords lest she float too near the rafters. "Good morning," she would call from above, her voice musical as a flute. "Isn't the world lovely?" And it was lovely, but her joy was like sunlight without warmth. One evening, the queen sat by the lake, watching her daughter glide above the water's surface, her reflection moving like a pale bird across the ripples. The queen sighed. "She laughs, but she does not live," she whispered. Oh, that she could feel the ground beneath her feet, even for a moment. The king nodded gravely beside her. "We must find a cure, or she will drift through life untouched." But no cure came. The scholars and healers of the realm could offer only words. "Perhaps," said one, "if she could be made to feel the weight of love or sorrow, the spell would weaken, for even lightness must bow to the heart." Years passed, and the light princess remained unchanged, beautiful, cheerful, and impossibly distant. One summer evening, when the air shimmered with heat and the lake lay still as glass, the princess floated above the water, trailing her fingers through the surface. She watched the ripples fan out in delicate circles, fascinated by how something unseen could move and change. Then, from the far side of the lake, came a sound, the splash of oars and the low hum of a song. A small boat appeared, rowed by a young man whose eyes reflected the sky. He was a prince from a neighboring kingdom, traveling the waterways of the world to learn its wonders. When he saw the princess drifting above the lake like a cloud caught in sunlight, he stopped his boat and stared in awe. "Good evening," he called. "Good evening," she replied, laughing. "Are you real or just another reflection?" "Real, I think," he said, smiling, "but you seem lighter than air." "I am," she answered, spinning lazily. "It's a rather inconvenient miracle." The prince laughed. "Then perhaps I can keep you company. It seems lonely up there." "Lonely?" She tilted her head. "What is lonely?" He looked at her with quiet curiosity. "It's what the heart feels when it remembers how much it needs others." The princess said nothing. For the first time in her life, a strange heaviness brushed her chest. Faint, new, like a whisper of gravity. The prince rowed closer, his voice gentle. "Would you like to come down?" She hesitated. "I can't. I never can." "Then I'll come up to you," he said playfully, and stood in his boat, reaching his hand toward her reflection. She laughed again, but this time the sound trembled. Something inside her stirred. The prince smiled up at her. "Then we'll meet halfway between sky and water." And, as the sun dipped low, their shadows touched upon the lake, her floating light, his grounded warmth, and for the first time, the light princess felt the faint pull of the world calling her home. The sun drifted low upon the horizon, painting the lake with ripples of rose and gold. The light princess floated just above its surface, her reflection trembling in the water, half sky and half earth. The young prince lingered nearby in his small boat, resting his oars, his eyes lifted toward her as though she were the last light of the day. For the first time in her life, the princess did not laugh. The sound of the water, the faint creak of the boat, and the quiet warmth in the prince's voice filled her with something she could not name. It was as though the air had thickened around her, gentle but firm, pulling her closer to the world below. "Do you always float so far from everything?" asked the prince. "Always," she said. "If I try to come down, the air lifts me again. Even when I sleep, I drift toward the ceiling. My maids must tie ribbons to my wrists to keep me from wandering into the clouds." The prince smiled softly. "And does it make you happy?" "I suppose so," she said, frowning faintly. A new expression for her. "I have never known another way." "Then perhaps," he said gently, "you do not yet know what happiness truly is." She looked at him in surprise. "What else could it be?" "I laugh, I sing, I am never sad." He leaned on his oar. "Then your heart has never been touched by weight, by love, by loss, by the simple ache of caring for another. Without that, laughter is only sound." The princess gazed down at the water. "Wait," she whispered, tasting the word like something foreign and beautiful. For many evenings the prince came to the lake. He told her stories of his travels, of forests thick with rain, of villages where bells chimed in the wind, of the quiet kindness of strangers. She would listen, floating just above him, her hair like sunlight on the water. Sometimes she laughed, but sometimes she only watched him with wide, wondering eyes. One night, the moon rose huge and golden over the lake. Its light wrapped them both in silver. The prince sat silently for a long while, then spoke. "Your kingdom is beautiful," he said, "but I have heard that it has no water beyond this lake." She nodded. "The rivers have long since dried. My father says it is the curse's doing. The water belongs to sorrow, and since I cannot feel sorrow, the rivers sleep." The prince's gaze grew thoughtful. "Then perhaps it is time they woke." "How could they?" He dipped his hand into the water, letting it flow through his fingers. "Sometimes, to wake what is sleeping, one must give something of oneself." The princess tilted her head. "You speak in riddles." "Perhaps," he said. "But the truth of it is simple. Without the weight of love, Even the deepest lake is only a mirror. The next day, the sky darkened with heavy clouds. The king and queen stood on the palace balcony, watching as the wind rose and waves began to churn upon the lake. In the distance, they saw the prince's boat near the center, where the water spun in a slow, deep whirlpool. The light princess floated above it, calling out, her voice bright with fear. "Come back, the storm will pull you under." "I must try," he called. "If the lake does not wake, the land will die. And perhaps if it does, so will the spell that keeps you apart from the earth." "No," she cried, "I cannot lose you." And as she spoke those words, something broke within her, a fragile thread of enchantment snapping in the air. For the first time her heart ached, heavy with fear and love. She felt herself sink, her feet brushing the cold surface of the water. The prince smiled through the storm. "Then come to me," he said. She reached out, trembling, her body sinking lower with each heartbeat. Rain began to fall, soft, endless, cleansing. The lake stirred as if remembering its purpose. The prince held out his hand, and she grasped it. For one heartbeat, they floated together, half above, half below, and then the lake surged upward in a great shining wave. When the storm passed, the water was calm once more. The prince lay upon the shore, pale but breathing. Beside him knelt the princess, not floating, not weightless, but resting upon the ground, her gown heavy with water and her heart full of love. She looked down at her hands, feeling the earth beneath her palms, the pull of her own body, the soft ache of joy and sorrow entwined. And though her eyes filled with tears, her smile was brighter than sunlight. The king and queen ran to her, crying with wonder. "My child," said the queen, "you are touching the ground." "Yes," said the princess, "and it is the most beautiful feeling in the world." She turned to the prince, who stirred weakly, and opened his eyes. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head faintly. "No, you saved yourself and your kingdom." For as they looked around, they saw the rivers pouring once more through the valleys, the fountains bursting to life in the gardens, the dry fields gleaming with streams of silver water. The curse was broken. That night, when the stars rose, the princess stood upon the grass beside the prince. She no longer drifted, she walked, each step a miracle. "Do you miss the sky?" he asked her softly. She smiled. "No, I have found something greater, the ground beneath my heart." And as the moonlight shimmered on the lake, now full and alive again, the princess took his hand, feeling the steady weight of his warmth, the rhythm of the world in every breath. Morning came soft and gold. The mist drifted over the lake in silver veils, and the air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth, rich, alive and new. The whole kingdom seemed to breathe again. Rivers ran through the valleys, the fountains leapt in the palace gardens, and from every rooftop came songs of joy. In the center of it all stood the light princess, her feet firmly upon the ground. For the first time in her life, she felt the gentle weight of the world pressing upward through the soles of her feet, steady, sure, and kind. It was not a burden, it was belonging. She walked slowly, savoring each step. The grass bent softly under her toes. The stones beneath her held the memory of the sun. And when she knelt by the edge of the lake, her reflection no longer floated away. It met her gaze, still and true. The prince lay nearby, resting on a bed of moss. His color had returned, his breathing strong. When he opened his eyes and saw her standing beside him, tears brightened his smile. "You're walking," he said, his voice trembling with joy. "I am," she whispered, "and it feels like music I can finally hear." He reached for her hand. "Then the spell is truly broken." "Yes," she said softly. "The curse was never just about floating. It was about forgetting how to care. You taught me what it means to feel. The joy, the fear, the ache, and the grace of it all. He smiled faintly. And you taught me how light the heart can be, even when it loves deeply. The princess looked over the lake. Sunlight danced upon its ripples, and every drop sparkled like a diamond. The water is awake now, she said. It remembers us. Together they walked along the shore, the breeze lifting the ends of their hair. Wherever her bare feet touched the ground, flowers sprang up, small, pale blossoms with petals like silver dew. When they reached the palace gates, the king and queen were waiting. The queen wept openly as she embraced her daughter. "My child," she said, "I have prayed for this moment every day." The princess held her tightly, her voice thick with tenderness. "Your prayers carried me back to earth." The king, wiping his eyes, took the prince's hand. "You have done more for this land than any knight or scholar. You have given us back our rivers and our daughter." The prince bowed humbly. "I did only what love asked of me, your majesty." That evening, the palace was filled with laughter and candlelight. The people danced in the courtyards, tossing flowers into the air, while the musicians played melodies that rippled like water. The princess joined in the dance, her feet sure upon the ground, her eyes bright as dawn. She spun, and for an instant the hem of her gown lifted, light as a memory, but she came down again with a smile. Later, when the celebrations quieted and the stars gathered above the lake, she slipped outside alone. The night was calm, the water smooth as glass. She knelt by the shore and spoke softly into the dark. "Old spell," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to fall." A small wave lapped against her hand as if answering. Behind her, the prince approached. "Do you miss floating?" She turned and shook her head. "No, floating was only half of living. Now I feel everything. The wind, the grass, the pull of the earth, the weight of my heart. It is all so beautiful." He smiled and took her hand. "Then perhaps you are lighter now than ever before, not in body, but in soul." The princess looked up at the stars reflected in the water. "I think," she said, "that true lightness isn't about escaping the ground. It's about loving it enough to stay." They stood together in silence, their reflections shining side by side, two figures rooted in the world, yet radiant as the moon above them. In time, the tale of the Light Princess became legend. Children of the kingdom would run laughing through the meadows, pretending to float above the earth, then sink down giggling, saying, "I am learning to feel." And when the rains returned each spring, the rivers sang her story back to the sea, of a girl who once drifted too high to touch the ground, and of the love that brought her home. Sometimes when the moon was full and the water perfectly still, travelers swore they saw two faint shapes upon the surface, a young woman in a gown of starlight and a prince by her side, walking together across the mirrored world, their feet touching both sky and earth at once. The kingdom prospered, green and gentle. The people learned from their princess that joy was not the absence of sorrow, but the calm between the two, the balance where heart and gravity meet. And whenever someone spoke too proudly or forgot to listen to the earth beneath their steps, they would smile and remind one another. Even the Light Princess learned to walk. The night faded slowly over the kingdom, the stars dimming like lanterns, carried away into dream. Dawn spread its soft gold across the meadows, and the air smelled of dew and new beginnings. From the hills to the harbors, every window glowed with the first light of day, and every heart, it seemed, woke a little gentler. In her chambers overlooking the lake, Princess Althea opened her eyes to the hush of morning. A faint mist hovered above the water, and birds sang from the reeds. For a long while she lay still, listening to her breath, to the pulse of the world, to the deep quiet that felt like peace itself. Her life had changed since the day she touched the ground. She had become both queen and gardener, ruler and friend, walking daily through the villages with her people, The rivers she had freed now nourished the valleys, turning dry fields to seas of green. Where once there had been stillness, laughter flowed again. And yet, even amidst her joy, she never forgot the feeling of floating, not as a curse, but as a memory of balance. For she had learned that the heart needs both, the lift of wonder and the weight of love. This morning, she rose and dressed simply in linen and silver. Her crown of gold remained upon the table. She wore it now only on feast days. She walked barefoot down to the gardens, where the first petals of spring had opened overnight. The ground was cool beneath her feet, the soil soft, alive. As she walked among the rows of wildflowers, she saw the prince, now her husband, tending the young peach trees they had planted together. He looked up as she approached, his smile as bright as the sun breaking through the clouds. "Good morning, my heart," he said. "Good morning," she replied. "The blossoms opened in the night. Look how the light rests upon them. It feels as if the world is breathing again." He nodded. "It is. Every day the earth remembers more of itself." They stood quietly for a while, listening to the wind move through the branches. At last, the princess spoke. "Do you ever think of that day on the lake?" The prince smiled. "Every time the rain falls, I remember how you laughed and wept in the same breath. The moment you first touched the ground." She reached for his hand. "It was the first time I knew what it meant to be alive." They walked down to the water's edge. The surface shimmered like polished glass, reflecting the sky so clearly it seemed another world entirely. A world where the air was still and time stood open. The princess knelt and touched the lake's skin with her fingertips. The ripples spread outward in delicate circles. "The water listens," she said softly. "It remembers every story that ends here." "Then it remembers all of ours," said the prince. "The laughter, the storms, the quiet days. It keeps them safe." Beyond the far shore, the mist began to lift, revealing the fields, the forests, and the mountains beyond. The same land where so many dreams had once been broken and made whole again. The princess smiled. "Do you think the others are happy, wherever they are? Lyra, and the happy prince, and the nightingale, and the giant who found spring again?" The prince looked toward the horizon, thoughtful. "I think they are part of this same morning," he said. "Every kindness, every act of courage, every gentle thing, they rise together with the dawn." The wind stirred the tall grasses, carrying the faint scent of distant blossoms. The lake caught the light of the sun and threw it upward like a mirror of heaven. The princess breathed deeply and closed her eyes. In that moment, she felt them all. The snowflakes of Ilarion melting into song, the golden heart of the happy prince beating beyond sorrow, the nightingale's true note lingering in the air, the giant's laughter carried on the wind, and the Prince of Paradise walking once more among his dreams. Each story, each soul, had found its place in the great tapestry of peace. The princess opened her eyes and whispered, "Then light always returns." The prince smiled. "Always. It may rest, but it never leaves." They stood together as the sun rose fully, its warmth flowing over the fields, over the rivers, over the quiet homes of the people. The world shone with a gentle radiance, not blinding, but soft and whole, as if it had finally remembered itself. In the silence that followed, a lark began to sing. Its voice was small, yet it carried high into the morning sky. The princess listened, her heart steady, her feet firm upon the ground. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "It sounds like the beginning of another story." He laughed quietly. "Then let's live it." Hand in hand, they walked toward the lake, their reflections joining in the water. Two bright figures surrounded by the calm of a world healed by love. And far above them, unseen but near, the west wind sighed through the clouds, carrying the echo of all who had walked before them. The snow melts, the lanterns glow, The song returns, the heart grows still and bright. This is how light finds its way home. The morning grew into full day, and still the air held the hush of new beginnings. The light spilled gently through the valleys, touching rivers, leaves, and rooftops alike, everything shimmering with quiet purpose. The kingdom had entered a time of peace. No heralds announced it, no bells were rung. It began simply, like a deep breath taken by the earth itself. The people smiled more easily, shared their harvests more freely, and spoke to one another in tones softened by memory. At the heart of this calm stood Queen Althea and her beloved prince, whose rule was unlike any before it. They governed not with laws written in gold, but with kindness measured in deeds. Each dawn they walked together through the meadows, barefoot, so they could feel the cool grass and the warmth of the waking soil. The dew wet their feet, the scent of wild thyme and rain filled the air. To the farmers and children who passed them, they looked less like rulers and more like caretakers, guardians of light and balance. One morning, when mist still curled above the lake, the queen paused on the path that led to the water's edge. "Listen," she said softly. The prince stopped beside her. At first he heard only silence. Then, faintly, there came the echo of music, not from instruments or voices, but from the land itself. The rhythm of waves lapping against the shore, the hum of bees stirring in the gardens, the whisper of wind through reeds. It was the same song that had once filled the Garden of Paradise, reborn now in every living thing. "It's all connected," said the queen. "Every story, every kindness, every tear shed and healed. They return like the seasons, different, yet the same." He smiled. "A circle without end." She nodded. "The circle of dawn." They sat upon a stone by the lake and watched as the sky brightened. The clouds parted in wide, slow spirals, as though the heavens themselves turned with the rhythm of her words. "I used to think light was something we chased," said Althea, her gaze soft. "Something fragile, something that faded when we lost hope. But now I see it differently. Light doesn't leave us, it becomes us. It lives wherever we choose to love." The prince took her hand. "Then your heart is the sun of this world." She laughed gently. "And yours is its morning breeze." The day unfolded quietly. Farmers brought baskets of fruit and flowers to the castle as gifts. Children released paper lanterns into the air, their small flames drifting upward like stars born in daylight. Each one carried a wish for safety, for kindness, for another year of peace. As evening neared, the queen and prince stood upon the highest balcony, watching the lanterns rise. The wind carried them eastward toward the mountains, where the snow still glowed faintly under twilight. The queen closed her eyes. In the rustle of wind she heard the voices of all who had come before. Lyra singing to the lanterns of Elarion, the happy prince whispering to his swallow, the nightingale's true song in the emperor's garden, the giant's laughter carried on spring air, and the prince of paradise walking once more among his dreams. Their stories had ended, and yet they had not. Each had become a light in the great circle, shining quietly within the next. The queen pressed her palms together, bowing her head. "May their peace remain in us," she murmured. The prince looked toward the horizon, where the last of the lanterns vanished into the stars. "It will," he said, "for peace isn't something we keep, it's something we pass on." Night deepened slowly. The moon rose full, casting the lake in silver. The people below gathered in small groups, their laughter soft and unhurried. The world seemed balanced between breath and silence, awake and dreaming. The queen leaned her head on the prince's shoulder. "Do you hear that?" He listened. The air itself seemed to hum, the faint vibration of harmony, the sound of hearts at rest. "I do," he said. "It's the world remembering itself." And in that still moment the circle closed. from lantern to star, from heart to earth, from silence to song. Far above the palace, a single light lingered longer than the rest. It was small but steady, as if the night itself had chosen to keep one flame awake. A reminder that all stories, no matter how softly they end, live on in the quiet turning of the dawn. The queen smiled faintly, her eyes half closed. "The circle continues," she whispered. The prince kissed her brow, "and always returns to light." The lake shimmered, the stars breathed, and the first soft wind of evening began its journey across the sleeping world, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings